Continue with our daily Gemara. You're on Sanhedrin, Kuf Yud Aleph and Beis 1:11b. We're about to begin the home stretch of this chapter, with which we'll conclude the tractate Sanhedrin. It's the home stretch because we're about to begin the last Mishnah of this tractate, and then the rest of the two folios to blot our commentary on the Mishnah we're about to read. Now, in this sense, we're about to begin a new discussion, really, because it's a new Mishnah. But of course, the Mishnah is a continuation to some degree of the Mishnah preceding it. So the context is, we've been discussing, of course, first individuals and then generations and groups of people who lost their share in the world to come. The Mishnah is now going to identify the last group of people that lose their share in the world to come. And this is not a group that happened, but rather a group of people that may have sinned. Namely, a group called Ir HaNidachas. Ir HaNidachas is a special law about a city that has been subverted, in which the majority of the city left the ways of Hashem and started to serve idols. And by Torah law, the city is put to death, treated with capital punishment because of the severity of an entire city abandoning God and worshipping idols. And the Gemara is going to tell us that this group, theoretically, if there was such a thing called an Ir HaNidachas, this subverted city, this city which strayed from serving Hashem and began to serve idols, they would also lose their share in the world to come. And beginning the Mishnah with that, the Mishnah will then go on to tell us the details of the halachas, the laws, regarding the Ir HaNidachas, regarding the subverted city. So let's begin. It's the middle of the page, and you see the big bold words, Mem Saf Nun Yud Masnison, which means our Mishnah. Anshe Ir HaNidachas, people of an Ir HaNidachas, of a subverted city, a city that strayed, we'll just call it Ir HaNidachas. Ein lehem chelek l'olam haba, the people of the city do not have any share in the world to come. Shenemar, as the verse reads, in describing the law of this Ir HaNidachas, the verse is in Devarim, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Yudalet, Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. All of those verses we're going to be analyzing as we go along in this Mishnah, and then in the Gemara's commentary. So the Torah describes the Ir HaNidachas as follows: Yatzu Anoshim B'nei Belial, wicked people emerged Mikibecha from amongst you. Ve'adichu es Anshe Yoshvei Edom, and they will subvert and divert the people of their city to no longer serve Hashem but to serve idols. Now, from the fact that the verse reads, bad people will leave from amongst your midst, from here the Gemara, the Mishnah derives that they lose their share in the world to come. Now, the Mishnah is going to take these very verses describing the law of the Ir HaNidachas and tell us the details of the law of this city. Number one, the Einen Niragin, they are not tried for capital punishment until the people who lead them astray come from that city. Right? Because the verse read, and bad people will emerge from your midst. So they have to come from within that city. If they came from a different city to push the people of this city to leave the ways of Hashem, then the city does not get the law of Ir HaNidachas. It's only people from that city. And likewise, Ma'isei HaShevet, from that tribe. So if this city belonged to the territory of the tribe of Judah, let's say, and these two people who grew up in that city, but they came from a different tribe, or this people that led the people astray came from a different tribe, even if they came from that city, then this city does not get the law of the Ir HaNidachas. So the law of the Ir HaNidachas only applies when A, the people who are subverting and directing the people away from God come from the city, and B, they are from the same tribe that city belongs to. Likewise, it's got to be the majority of the city has to have been redirected to idol worship. If only part of it, or any less than the majority, then it doesn't get the law of the Ir HaNidachas. We'll see soon what the uniqueness of the law of the Ir HaNidachas is. The Mishnah will tell us soon. And this, Rashi tells us, two different versions, but the verse reads, Yoshvei Ir, the people who dwell in the city, meaning the majority of the city. Likewise, Va'achi Dechoa Nashim, the people who lead the city astray have to be men. Because the verse right before, Yatsu Nashim B'liyal, evil men emerge from within you to redirect the city in an evil way. So it has to be men who come from that city, who come from that shevet, that tribe, and they were successful in getting at least the majority of the city to stop serving God and rather serve idols. And likewise, they have to be men. That's just the law we just said now. If it were women or children that led the people astray, led the city astray, or if only a minority of the city were led astray, or if the people leading the city astray came from outside the city and outside the shevet, then each individual Jew who followed these people and became idol worshippers are treated like individuals. In other words, there is an individual who serves idols, and this individual has a certain set of laws, as we'll describe in a moment. And then there's a city that serves idols, and they have a separate set of laws. And the Mishnah is now discussing what's the difference between, at what point do we decide that it's not a bunch of individuals that serve idols, and therefore are to be treated, each of them, according to the law of the individual, and when does it become a city in which they are judged according to the law of the Ir HaNidachas, the city which led astray. And those are the qualifying distinctions that the Mishnah makes. In order for it to qualify as an Ir HaNidachas, it has to be the majority of the city. The people leading them astray have to come from their city, have to come from their shevet, have to be men, adult men, and they have to be successful in getting the majority of the city to be led astray. If any of those 5 conditions are not met, then each individual who served idols is treated as an individual. Now, when it comes to treating an individual, it's much, much harsher to treat an individual to the point that he's liable for capital punishment. Why? Because an individual who serves idols, in order for him to be liable, in order for him to actually receive capital punishment, there's a condition which makes it very difficult to almost ever execute the actual punishment, pun intended. Namely, you have to have 2 witnesses to witness the event, the transgression, in this case the idol worship, and you have to have these 2 witnesses, or at least somebody, laws are complicated, but the point is there has to be 2 witnesses that watch the event, and the person doing the sin has to be warned. And not just warned, he has to be told, you should know that this very act you're about to do is going to cause you to die at the hands of the court. And he says, I know, I don't care, does it anyway, and within a certain time frame, and then he is liable for capital punishment. So because of these conditions, in other words, if you had proof, video camera proof, definitively, that this person served idols, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to get capital punishment. He has to have the 2 witnesses, and he has to have the warning, and it's the very specific warning in a very specific time frame for him to actually get capital punishment. So therefore, judging them as individuals makes it much harder for them to actually get the punishment. But if they're judged as a city, then they don't have to have 2 witnesses and warning. So long as the conditions mentioned before are met, majority of the city, men leading them astray, and the men, adult men, and they come from the shevet, they come from that tribe, they come from that city as well. If all those conditions are met, then they're treated like a city and they don't need to have the witnesses. Which basically means it's very hard to ever implement this capital punishment. Because to judge as a city, you need all those conditions which are very difficult to get. And if they're judged as individuals, there are other conditions that need to be met. Namely, you have to have 2 witnesses and the warning. Which leads to a general question which I get often. Well, first of all, people always ask about the barbarity of the Torah, God forbid, perceived barbarism, and that every other sin, not every other sin, but many sins is capital punishment. For example, someone breaks the law of Shabbos, stoned to death. Sounds somewhat bizarre, extreme. And the explanation is that the reality is that it barely ever happens that someone actually makes it to the point where he gets capital punishment for that. And the reason is we just explained, because you have to have two witnesses in the warning and the whole thing, and it makes it very difficult to actually implement the capital punishment. Now, if the Torah system is such that it's very difficult to ever make it to capital punishment, the question becomes, why did the Torah make that the punishment in the first place, if it's never going to happen? So the reality is, the Torah is teaching us a very important thing. On the one hand, Torah is telling us that, do you know how egregious this sin is? It's so egregious that the person should be put to death. That's how egregious it is. In other words, the punishment Torah allots to a certain sin is not about implementation per se. It's more about informing the individual how severe that sin is. It's so severe that Torah's prescribed punishment is capital punishment. Now, the reality is we don't want people to get killed. And therefore, the Torah set up the system in such a difficult way that it's very hard to actually make it to capital punishment. Because like I mentioned before, the conditions of Ir HaNidachas are such that it's very difficult to ever get to. And the conditions of putting an individual to capital punishment requiring two witnesses with the warning also makes it very difficult. But nonetheless, the Torah wants to inform you that this is how bad that sin is. It's so bad that the punishment is capital punishment. In reality, we're going to try our best not to actually implement that punishment. But theoretically, and the way we should perceive the weight of this sin, or the weight of this mitzvah, is by the punishment. The reward and the punishment inform you how important these mitzvahs and these sins are, even if in the reality, we're never going to implement that punishment. Okay. Let's go forward. Now the Gemara Mishnah continues. The following is a stringency with respect to individual people who worship idols in capital and getting capital punishment if they made it that far over a city on Ir HaNidachas, if it were to meet all the conditions and be liable for capital punishment. Shayachidim biskila, individuals who are found guilty of worshiping idols and meet the conditions of two witnesses with the warning as we described before, their death is skila, stoning. In other words, the Mishnah is telling us that an individual choosing to worship idols in some way is worse than a city, because if you're swept up in the city, you're kind of, your culpability is not individualized; it's on the whole city, or the people who led the person astray. Whereas an individual who makes that choice, in some degree, is worse, and therefore the punishment for death is a worse death, as it were, which is stoning. Lefichach, therefore, memoinam palit. Therefore, because it's a stricter death, therefore their money, their property, it doesn't get destroyed, and their inheritors can keep their money after this person is put to death. Now, but masses on Ir HaNidachas, a city, if it met all the conditions and actually made it to the point of capital punishment, then their death is not by stoning, but by a knife. And death by a knife is more painless, and therefore a less degree of punishment than death by stoning. Lefichos, therefore, because their death is a less severe death, therefore their property, abid, is destroyed. Further details with respect to the law of the Ir HaNidachas, the city that goes astray. The verse reads, smite you shall smite the inhabitants of the city at the sword. And if the Gemara comments, if there is a caravan of donkeys or caravan of camels or any kind of caravans that's traveling from one city to the next, and they happen to be in this city for 30 days, they then become inhabitants of the city, and therefore they can tip the scale to make the minority or make a majority. In other words, if let's say there is exactly 50-50, 50% of the city is worshiping idols, and the other 50% is not worshiping idols. Now these 30 people, these caravan of camels or caravan of donkeys, and they're spending 30 days in the city, then those people, if they are idol worshippers, then they tip the scale in the majority, rendering the entire city on Ir HaNidachas. Now, if they were not idol worshippers, they do the reverse. They save the entire city because now they've pushed the people who have served idols into the minority because they arrived in town and they aren't worshipping idols. So that's the first law, that travelers who spend 30 days in the city become like residents of the city, in that they are counted when we are deciding whether or not there's a majority of idol worshippers or not, in order to make it qualify for an Ir HaNidachas or not. Now, Shenemar, and the fact that the verse reads, Hachar Moisev es kol asher ba, destroy everything that's in the city, lay waste to it and to all that's in the city, Ves behemta, and all the animals, lefichara, by the sword. So from that verse, from here we've been told, nichse tzadikim, the property of the righteous, shebesoicha, that's in that city, avodim, get lost or destroyed, because it says to destroy everything in the city. Shebechutzala, stuff, a righteous person who owns property outside of that city, plaitin, gets saved. But for Shal Rishayim, but the wicked people of that city, bein shebesoicha, whether their property is in the city, bein shebechutzala, whether their property is outside of the city, avodim, gets lost. So all property in the city must be destroyed, as the Torah says. So if the person is righteous, his property is lost, because the Torah says all property in the city gets lost, gets destroyed. If he happens to have property out of the city, there's no reason to destroy it. But a wicked person, he has to be destroyed, plus his property has to be destroyed. And therefore, if this person is one of those people who, one of the majority who's worshipping idols, his property gets destroyed, even that which is out of the city. Because he as an individual has to be, the property of the wicked have to be destroyed, even if it's out of the city. Now, Shenemar, because the verse reads, "Ves kol shlala tikboitz el toich rechava v'gomer," all of its loot, all of the belongings of the city should be taken to the thoroughfare, to the square, and there it should be lost. That's what the verse reads. Im ein la charav, if the Mishnah says, if it doesn't, im ein la rechav, if it doesn't have a thoroughfare, if it doesn't have a square, oisin la rechav, make one. If it had a square, it had a thoroughfare outside of the parameters of the city, we bring that, we make the city such that it surrounds the thoroughfare, so that we meet the criteria of the verse, which is that you have to bring all the property to the thoroughfare that's in the city. So if it doesn't have one, make one, and if it has one outside, envelop it in the city. Now, Shenemar, from the fact that the verse reads, you should burn down this city by fire, and all of its loot, all of its property should be burnt up to Hashem, to God your Lord. So number one, says the Mishnah, we derive from here, shlala, its property, but not property that belongs to heaven. Meaning, from here we say, if there's property, if there is property in the city that have already consecrated to the temple, so now it doesn't belong to the people. It belongs to God, it belongs to heaven. And the verse says to destroy all the property of the city. This is property that doesn't belong to the city. This is property that belongs to God already. So it has to be redeemed. So you redeem that, let's say, a cow that's been consecrated, or a sheep that's been consecrated to become a offering in the temple. So you pay out the cost of the sheep. That money goes to the temple, and the sheep now no longer belongs to heaven, no longer belongs to the temple, and can be destroyed in the city. The trumos, if there are donations that have been given to the Kohen already, Yirkavu should be let to rot. The Kohen can't eat it because it came from this negative city, but it can't be destroyed because it doesn't belong to the city, it belongs to the Kohen. Ma'aser Sheni is a certain type of tithe which the Jew takes to Jerusalem and eats it there. So it belongs to the Jew, but it has a certain holiness to it that the Jew has to eat it in Jerusalem. So that, the Kisvei Kodesh and any scrolls that have holy text, God's name on it, Yignezu, are to be buried. Now, the verse reads that the city should be burnt up as a whole offering to God. Rabbi Shimon states, God is telling the Jewish people, if you make judgment on an Ir HaNidachas, on this city, and you judge it in accordance to its law, it meets all the conditions of the castaway city, the Ir HaNidachas, and you judge its law that all the property is destroyed in the thoroughfare of the city, and it's done, and the people are killed at the hand of the sword, the city is burnt. I consider it, says God, as if you have offered for me a perfect offering, a whole offering, because the verse reads, you have to burn it up, you have to burn the city, kol Hashem, as completely burnt to God, and thus Rabbi Shimon derives that God is telling us that one who brings or implements the judge of the law of the Ir HaNidachas in accordance to its ruling and according to its laws, as we just described, it's considered to God as if it's a perfect offering. The verse continues, "V'hoisa tel olam," that the city should be, after it's burnt down, it should be a mound forever. And therefore we derive from here, loisasa ginus epidasayim. It should not be turned into orchards or gardens. The verse says it should remain a mound forever, and therefore you can't plant anything. These are the words of Rabbi Saglidi. Rabbi Kiva says, the verse reads, the same verse continues and reads, you should not build it up again as it was. Or I'm sorry, the verse says, you should not build it again. So says Rabbi Kiva, you cannot make the city to the way it was. But you could make orchards and you could make gardens. So Rabbi Saglidi says, it's got to remain a mound forever, and therefore you can't even plant anything there. Rabbi Kiva says, you cannot rebuild it, but to have gardens there and to have orchards, that you may. Finally, the final comment from the Mishnah, the verse reads, nothing left should be in your hand from that which is been destroyed in that city. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, this teaches us that so long as there are wicked people in this world, there is God's anger in the world. But if there are wicked people still in the world, if the wicked people are lost and removed from this world, as would be the law with the Ir HaNidachas, then God's anger is removed from this world. So negative behavior brings with it the anger of God, God forbid, and positive behavior, or the removal of negative behavior, the removal of the wicked, gets rid of God's anger in the world, telling us the power, telling us the power we have in our behaviors and our actions to influence divine grace or lack thereof in this world. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to attend to my Chaim here, and God willing, we're looking forward to continuing tomorrow the Gemara's comments and further understanding the law of the Ir HaNidachas.